Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Do Tell Story Swap Celebration Edition. And this is something we do once a year during the month of November, which is Storytelling Month. I want to welcome you to a wonderful lineup of tellers tonight. And of course, it is tradition to begin celebration with the age-old proclamation. So I'm going to start with that. In the name of storytelling, the National Storytelling Network and the Do Tell Story Swap Santa Rosa are proud to sponsor Telebration. This is November 12th, Tuesday, 2024, and it is hereby proclaimed to be Telebration, the worldwide event of storytelling at this very moment across 6 continents in 40 states and 9 countries, from Sacramento to Savannah, Boise to Barcelona, West Virginia to the West Indies, India to Santa Rosa. There are over 300 audiences gathering for this storytelling event throughout this entire month. And without further delay, enjoy, and anticipation, let the stories begin. Hooray!
Yay!
I'm very pleased to be your host. My name is Brandon Spars. I am a member of the Do Tell Story Swap in Santa Rosa. And I just want to give a shout out to Kenneth Foster, who is here with us. He is the founder of our swap. And that was back in 2011 in his garage, where he would pull his car out, put a rug over the oil stain to hide it, and hold a monthly event that became known as the Do Tell Story Swap. And so here we are, more than 13 years later. Kenneth still going strong. Marian Ferrante is with us, and she goes way back 30 years in the swap world. Thank you for joining us, Marian. So I want to acknowledge you as well. And now on to our stories. We have a great lineup, and I am very pleased to introduce our featured teller. And I'm going to pull her up with me. This is Alicia Retes. She resides in the unceded lands of the Coast Miwok in Marin County, California. She's a captivating storyteller and visual arts performer of original and indigenous stories for all ages. Alicia thrives on exploring trickster, shapeshifter characters who embody a wide range of human emotions and reactions, while providing opportunities to transform preconceived ideas and to unite audiences in laughter. I am so honored to be giving you the virtual floor, Alicia, and thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. At 5 years old, my father insisted that I memorize my full name and introduce myself formally. It sounded like an easy thing. Most of us have 2, 3 names. My father was actually teaching me a family oral tradition of nearly 5 generations. My father was a Mexican citizen from the town of Huatabampo in Sonora, Mexico, which is a Mayo ceremonial town. And so now I will introduce myself formally in honor of all my ancestors. I am Alicia Mary Teresa de las Flores, Retes, Johns, Topete, Smith, Almava, Wilson, Iberra, Snow, Stone. At your service.
Mhm.
um, my fourth great grandmother was full blooded Cherokee, but most of my indigenous roots come from my father's side, and they are the Yoremi, commonly known as Mayo, not Mayan, and the Yoemi, commonly known as the Yaqui. They're both cousins, and they are traditionally farmers and artisans. And the Yaqui are also known for being fierce warriors. In fact, their reputation as the fighting farmers of Mexico. And so we begin. I'm going to tell the story, or my adaptation of the Yaqui Two Bear story. I should mention that Yoemi means people who follow their ancestors, and Yaqui is actually more like a nickname that the neighboring tribes gave to them, and it means people with the voice of authority. Leo sin shamanabu, Leo sin sham chokwe, Leo sin shamanabu, Leo sin sham chokwe. May Creator help you, may Creator bless you, may Creator help you, may Creator bless you. On warm evenings, the people sit outside the Yaqui River at the foothills of the Bacatati Mountains. When they see a shooting star, an elder might say, Huate hako, recuerdos cuando? Do you remember when? And this is when a story begins. This one is about 100 years ago. There were two orphaned Yaqui brothers who learned to survive and navigate within multiple nations, the Europeans, the Mexicans, the Americans. Traditionally, they're farmers, growing corn, bean, and squash, and fishing from the Yaqui River. But during this confusing time, they actually made more of a living entertaining at the fiestas. Fiesta is a word that means a happy, joyful celebration. It can go on for a day or several days. There's lots of dancing and music, food, races, and games. And during the colonial Spanish time, there were fighting bears and dancing bears and bulls, too. Well, these two brothers were orphaned because of a raid on their village. So they loved each other very much and they were inseparable. One day, on their way to a fiesta, they were going through the woods and they stopped in the shade to eat their fish tacos. And they saw a bear in the fork of a tree along their pathway. Well, they waited for a little bit, hoping the bear would move on, but it didn't move. They tossed some food out, hoping to distract the bear and continue on, but still, the bear did not move. Now, younger brother is Anoki Ichi. He has a pencil-thin mustache. He's rather charming and enterprising, but self-serving, devious, and kind of bossy. His older brother, Bali Ichi, is a strong body, a good, kind heart, and a trusting soul. And so during this time, Bali Ichi and Anoki Ichi were trying to figure out what to do about this situation. Bali Ichi. Bali Ichi, you should go talk to the bear. Husa kainipo. ¿Por qué? Why me? Bali Ichi, you have a good voice, you have a nice way with the animals, and you are my older brother, you must protect me. Well, I wonder what language the bear would speak. I'll try Yoremi. Leo Sinchumanabu Huso. Greetings, bear. May Creator help you. But the bear didn't respond. Español. Hola, señor oso. ¿Cómo estás? The bear didn't respond. Even kindly said, Mr. Bear, how are you? So he tried English. Hey there, Mr. Bear. How you doing? Still, the bear did not move. Baliichi, you should take this bean burrito, go to the tree next to the bear, and toss the burrito so he can see the burrito. Maybe he cannot hear. Why me? Balichi, you are bigger, stronger than me, and you're my older brother. You have to protect me. Against his better judgment, he climbed up the tree, he scooted on to the branch, just about where the bend is, and he tossed the burrito. It landed on the bear's head. Yeah, he beamed the bear, but still the bear didn't move. But Badiichi lost his balance. He slipped and fell and tumbled down and went back into the bushes with his brother. Well, the two of them thought it over and decided they should both go and investigate this very strange, mysterious situation with the bear. So Onoki Ichi had his walking stick, and his brother, that was Bali Ichi, had his walking stick. And his younger brother, Onoki Ichi, well, he was right behind him, whispering, "Poke the bear with your walking stick." Reluctantly, Bali lifted up his walking stick and he poked the bear. Whoa! The bear fell down. It landed belly up, arms and legs still in a climbing position. Well, upon closer examination, they saw the broken arrow in his chest and the wound where the bear had bled out. Oh, Baliichi, Juno. We should skin the bear very carefully and make the hide beautiful, huh? Okay, that sounds good, but first we should bless the bear. Leo sin shamana boo. He was sprinkling marigold petals around the bear. Leo sin shamana boo. May Creator help you. And so they salted the hide and they stuffed the arms, legs, and torso with grass and they let it stay there for a few days. When they finally came back, the hide, after they took out all the grass, it stood perfectly fine. Oh, Baliichi, Juno. This is a gift for us. Most people who have the dancing bears, they have to go hunt the bear or train the little bear, and it's very difficult. Juno, what we can do, you should get into the bear hide, huh? I play the drum, and we go to the fiestas, we make more money. Oh, he didn't even ask why me. And in his circumstances, he realized, well, it's as good an idea as any. So he stepped into the hide and got the bear head over his face, and he laced it up with leather lace. And then he started to move around like a big bear. And his brother was really impressed with his older brother. He really looked like a bear. He acted like a bear. So he tied a red bandana around his brother bear neck, and he tied a rawhide rope, held it in one hand, and a big stick on the other hand, and off they went to the fiestas. And sure enough, they did. Oh, great. They had really very successful. Now, one time, they performed for un rico patron, a very wealthy landowner who had a big ranch surrounded by a carrizo fence, but far away from any other villages. And they performed for this rich patron and his beautiful daughter, Marta. Well, she thought the bear was kind of cute, something gentle about him, enjoyed his dancing. And El Patron threw some money at the bear. The bear caught the money, nodded as if to say thank you, gave the money to his master, his brother, and twirled around, and everything was great. And then he started to leave. But El Patron decided that he had to have the bear. Oye, how much do you want for the bear? I pay, no matter the cost, eh? Oh, no, senor. I could not sell my bear. I raised him since he was little, and he depends on me, and what he earns me my living. I couldn't sell my bear. Oh, yeah, listen to me. I will give you a cart of gold, and you may have my daughter, Marta, the most beautiful woman in the world, eh? Oh, sí, sí, that's muy bonita, muy bonita. But no, 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 no. Should you give me your whole house full of gold and two women? No, no, no. I could not sell my bear. Listen to me. I can see you are very fond of the bear, but he's only a bear. I offered you an opportunity to get out of your poverty, huh? Huh? Mira, camarón que se duerme, se lo lleva la corriente. The shrimp that fall asleep are carried off by the current. In other words, if you snooze, you lose. Listen to me. With all this money, you could do whatever you want, huh? And you have a beautiful woman to marry, eh? Anoki Ichi was thinking about it, and he went to his brother and he whispered, "So, what do you say? Should I leave you? Should I leave you here?" His brother, the bear, stood on his hind legs, and he shook his head, and he was wiping his eyes so all that could see that he was weeping, and he whispered to his brother, "Hermanito, little brother, don't do this to me. Don't sell me." But Anoki Ichi heard the clanging of the gold, and he slipped and slid out of his brother's embrace like a snake, and he put his hands into the gold coins and the silver coins. Oh, greed filled his veins, and his groin was filled with lust for the beautiful woman. He took the woman and the gold and gave the bear to the patron. He sold his only brother, walked away. Well, no, Baliichi, he couldn't do very much about this, because if he said something, well, this very mean patron would kill both of them. He had no choice. So they put him into a corral. Now, in this corral, there was another bear, kind of big, and Baliichi was kind of afraid. And this big bear sniffed the air and got up and lumbered towards Baliichi, and he stood on his hind legs if he might attack. But this bear too was afraid, because he too was a man in disguise. Ah, Dios mío! So the two were approaching each other, deathly afraid. They were saying their prayers. And as soon as they could hear each other's voices, Balichi said, "You're a man? Yes, I'm Fausto. Bueno, Fausto, let's keep acting like bears so he doesn't kill us. Okay." So they rolled around and they tussled. They got on all fours on the ground, and El Patron was quite satisfied. And the bears went up towards the back. Well, they fought like this daily until one fateful day, when the owner was sleeping during the siesta time. He was in his hammock. One of the bears said, "Hey, I'm so hot. I'm going to take this mask off." Patron is sleeping. I get my mask off. He undid the lace, and he pulled the bear head mask off of his face. And the other bear did the same thing. They enjoyed the fresh air, and the two of them commenced to have a peaceful smoke and talk about what had happened, how they were betrayed and stuff. But then the owner woke up. Oh, when he saw that he had been tricked and those were men in bear hides, oh, he fumbled out of his hammock and he went for his rifle. "I would kill the both of you." And so they started to run. They leaped over the Carrizo fence and they kept running, and nobody ever caught up with them, but they feared for their lives, so they kept running. Eventually, they came across a small farm where a woman was hanging up her husband's clothing. And when she saw two bears with human heads running amok, adios, she fainted. And the two bears came and they grabbed some clothes and stuffed them into their hides and kept running. They came to an overgrown arroyo, and with their clean clothes tucked in their hide, they got on four knees and they They climbed, they crawled through all the brambles and the bushes until they finally came to an opening of the Yaqui River. They burst out of their hides and jumped in the water. It was cool and refreshing, and they cried and they laughed. And shortly, a traveler, a woman wearing a black skirt and a straw hat and a rickety old cart drawn by a mule, pulled up and parked on the hard sand. She set up a modest camp and started cooking tortillas and beans. Well, the men quickly clothed and driven by hunger and curiosity, they went over and asked if she would share some of their food. Pues, you want to trade those hides for some food? That would be okay. The men were only too happy to get rid of the hides, but when they lifted it up, oh, the stench of body sweat and dirt, it permeated the air. Disgusting. And she merely said, it's okay, it's okay. You may join me anyway. So they gathered, kind of like comrades around this fire. And Baliichi stoked the fire and he looked at the woman and he said, how is it that such a beautiful woman, how is it that you're traveling with such meager belongings? And the woman looked up, revealing her beautiful but dirt face with tears running down her face. She pulled her shawl closer to her and she said, my father sold me, along with a cart of gold, for a dancing bear. Oh, he was my husband. Anokiichi was his name. And he got a big house and many servants to do all his bidding, but this was not enough for him. No, he wanted more. His new friends told them to invest his money and he would be richer than any king. Well, they took his money and went away. And my husband, he went loco and ran off into the desert. I just had to get out. Paliichi stoked the fire a little bit more. And he looked at the woman, and the woman looked at him and said, You seem familiar. Have we met? And Paliichi felt so ashamed for the pain that he had caused her, said, I am Paliichi. Anokiichi was my brother, and I was a dancing bear. My brother sold me, he betrayed me, and I am much ashamed. Can you forgive me? What? You were the bear? Yes, I can see you are not like your brother. I can forgive but not forget. Our loved ones have betrayed us. And then Fausto, the other fella, he stood up and he said, we have all been betrayed, but now we have to make a living. I don't want to wear those damn bearskins, but I play the drum. You and Marta, you could dance and go to fiestas. We make some good money. At that moment, a star danced across the sky, and they burned the bear hides in a ritual of purification and redemption. And sure enough, they went on to go to all these fiestas, and they did a fabulous job and brought in some more money. At one of these fiestas, they saw a bear tied very tightly to a post, and its master was saying, no more dancing for you. Now, tomorrow you fight the bull, the toro. I make more money. You might die, but I make more money. And he left. Well, that poor bear brought his paw up and pulled on his bandana and lifted his mask, revealing a man's chin and a pencil-thin mustache. Story done. I wish I could hear your applause. Thank you so much. Oh, yay! Turn it up, baby.
Alicia, that was wonderful. Oh my God. I love the expression, the shrimp falling asleep, carried away by the current.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's
And
an old Mexican saying.
yeah. There
Yeah.
should be an expression about a stench like two men wearing a bear suit running at tortillas and beans.
Yeah, thank you. It's, I have different versions of that story, but that's one that I try to keep to 20 minutes. How'd I do?
Uh,
Uh,
it came
80.
in at 20 minutes, but the introduction was 2 minutes. Your story began, so it was 18 minutes, your story, which was perfect.
Okay. Oh, so I always, when you tell, when on stage and stuff, or
Yeah.
when it's kind of regimented a little more, you have to be right at 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So that, I think, doesn't that include the intro too, right?
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
I just did the intro, and then because I didn't know if that was the beginning of your story, but then I realized it wasn't the story. So then I made sure that I knew when your story began. So
Thank you.
it was 20 minutes. Yeah, you're welcome.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for this opportunity. I really
Oh,
appreciate it. Thank you. Mwah.
I love how it came together at the end too. That was wonderful. I will never look at a
Yeah. And,
bear the same way.
and I found this in, I can't really think of Ruth. I can't think of her last name. She collected a bunch of these tales, and it doesn't have the part where he runs off and all this stuff. This that I added a whole bunch of stuff in the beginning and in the end, because the way it's ended in the book, it's just, and no one saw them again. And of course, as a
Oh,
storyteller, I went, well, I wonder what happened. And hence
well,
that story.
you made it your own. That's
Yeah.
wonderful. That was really
Thank you.
wonderful. We're very
Thanks so
lucky
much.
to have had you as our featured teller tonight. Thank you so much, Alicia.
Thank you. I'm so pleased to be here. Thank you so much.
Wow, what a great beginning to our celebration tonight. Um, I don't see Brother Ben in our attendees, and he is our other featured teller. I've let him know we're eagerly waiting for him, so hopefully he'll see that and join us. But I'm going to jump ahead and Meg, are you ready? So Meg is unmuting. And I should just say that Meg has been,
Okay,
there you go.
okay. You can hear me now?
Yes.
Okay,
So
good.
Meg
I'm
has
dealing.
been with the Do Tell swap since 2013. So that's very close to the beginning, which was 2011. And she's been telling stories in what she refers to as her friendly atmosphere of the swap. And she enjoys telling folk tales, fairy tales, and stories of her family history gleaned from old letters and her parents' memories. Meg's used stories to teach children and in her work as a consultant, and she's helped produce several celebration events, including this one. And she manages outreach to the community for Do Tell Story Swap. So please welcome to our virtual stage, Meg Brown.
Hello, everyone. I'm so glad to be here. On a new computer, and it was a little dicey getting here. And thank you, Alicia. That was just a wonderful, wonderful story. You're such an expressive teller. Well, tonight I'm going to tell you a story about my family. And it was a story told to me by my mother about her father, Walter Best. Um, in J.M. Barrie's story, Peter Pan, Peter Pan asks the children, would you like to go on an adventure now? Or would you rather have your tea first? Well, my grandfather, Walter Best, he would have said, hands down, tea first. He was born in 1887 in England to a family of folks that farmed. And his favorite time of the day was tea because the family would gather around, they would have nice things to eat, and they would have big cups of tea. And his tea would have a lot of sweet milk mixed in with it. He was fascinated with all of the technical development developments that were happening in that time, both the industrial and commercial developments. And he was particularly interested in the steam engines, which were driving industry and commerce in many of the developed lands. And he was so interested, he said, I don't want to be a farmer. I want to be an engineer. And he convinced his family to send him to engineering school. Now, he really excelled at engineering. And when he graduated, he was able to go to the big ports in England, and he was able to find a job as an engineer's assistant. And over the next few years, he worked his way up until by 1909, he was a ship's engineer. A wonderful position. It was right below the captain of the ship. And so he got to enjoy all the amenities of having that much status, and he was able to eat his meals at the captain's table. He had a steward who would take care of his uniform, clean up his cabin, and bring him tea every day at 4 o'clock. Well, he had adventures. He went all over the world with the shipping companies. He went to Morocco and South Africa. He went to Egypt and India and Indonesia. And for 5 years, he loved being on the sea and seeing the world. But then World War I broke out. And there was a great demand for experienced seamen from the Navy, but Walter, my grandfather, did not want to be a part of the British Navy. And so when the Americans joined the war in 1916, he was given an opportunity to go to work for them, moving men and material over to Europe to help fight World War I. And so over the course of the war, he was working as a ship's engineer on big cargo ships, bringing these materials and supplies over back and forth. Well, when the war was over, the Americans offered all those who had worked for them to immigrate to America. And so my grandfather, with his new bride, my grandmother, they moved to just south of New York City. With his experience, my grandfather was able to go to work for companies like Cunard and White Star Lines, where they were bringing passengers from America to the continent back and forth. They didn't have airplanes at the time, so it was ship travel. And my grandfather really enjoyed that as well. It was good work. And he and my grandmother had started their family, my mother and my aunt, and they were very, very good years. But then it all fell apart because 1929, the big crash, he lost his job. He lost any money that he had, but they had a farm. And so they made it through the Depression years fairly well on subsistence. And he hated not being at sea. So when things began to pick up in the late 1930s, he decided he would go back and get his engineer's license renewed, only to find out that in the meantime, the steam engines had given way to diesel engines. So he had to educate himself as to how diesel engines worked. And he did this all in self-study. Finally, he went and he took the engineering exam and he failed it. So he had to go back and he studied even harder and he found out even more about diesel engines so that when he went back to take the exam again, he passed with flying colors. Well, this was just as the World War II was breaking out. And of course, the Allies were fighting Hitler in Germany and they were struggling. The Nazis were just devastating country after country in the war. And so then in 1941, President Roosevelt, the Europeans had pleaded to help get aid for them because we did not want to get into the war at that point. He established the Lend-Lease program. Well, the Lend-Lease program was a shipping program, and because they could not involve the military, they employed what they called the merchant marine. And what they did was they put together convoys of huge ships that would deliver oil and food and airplanes and tanks and all kinds of things to support the allies who were fighting in Europe. Well, it was a good job for him. He wanted to be part of this because England was so hard hit, and that was his birth country. So he signed on with one of the cargo ships. The caravans they were configured in 5 ships per column, and then the columns were stacked about 1,000 yards from each other and moved across the Atlantic Ocean in big groups. But it was a very dangerous thing because the Germans had the U-boats, the submarines with their torpedoes, and they would attack the convoys and they would blow up the ships or disable them. And if that happened, the convoy did not stop to help them out. They had to keep going. And it was really very frightening for everyone sometimes when these attacks were happening. Well, one morning, the convoy was steaming across the North Atlantic. And it was about mid-morning. The men had had their breakfast and they were going about all of their duties. And the sky was clear and the sea was calm. It was a very nice day when all of a sudden there was an enormous thud and an explosion, and the ship just shivered. The whole ship just trembled. And then the sirens went off, blaring, abandoned ship, abandoned ship. And all the sailors, they ran and grabbed their life jackets, throwing them on and running to the edge of the ship where they began to winch down the lifeboats. And then the men climbed into the lifeboats and they rowed away from the ship. Well, every ship had a commanding officer in it. And so they went out into the ocean and they looked out, and there they saw the convoy just disappearing over the horizon. And they realized they were alone and there was no rescue coming. This was it. Now, what was going to happen? Well, you can imagine how the men felt. Despair, sadness, anger, who knows? But for sure, they were not feeling very good, and they didn't know what was going to happen. Well, they sat in their lifeboats as the ship was over in the distance, and they waited. And the hours passed by, and the hours passed by. And my grandfather was sitting in the lifeboat, and he was watching the ship. And he was watching it and he was watching it. And then it was getting to be about mid-afternoon. And he was thinking, it is just about time for my tea. I don't want to just sit out here while this boat is just slowly sinking. And so he said to his men, Men, we are going back to the ship. I have to get my tea and see what's going on in this ship. And so the men began to row him back to the ship. Well, the captain saw what was going on, and he said, I'm not letting him go by himself. And he told his men to go ahead and row also back to the ship. And when they got there, they told the men to stay in the lifeboats, but they got out and they began to explore and see what was going on. And sure enough, in the bow of the boat, all of the sheathing had been broken up and breached, but the rivets had held. So the water was pouring in, but they knew that they could repair it. My grandfather went to the engine room And again, the water had just poured in there and it had risen to like half the height of the engines. Well, the captain called all the men back and they set out pumping the water out of the ship and beginning to repair the damage. It's one thing that sailors actually know how to do, how to fix a ship like this when they're in the middle of the ocean. And so they pumped the water out, and also in the engine room, my grandfather had his crew pumping out the water, and finally they had the water all out and the ship repaired. And then my grandfather set in repairing the engines. They had to take the whole engine apart and clean all of the pieces because they were soaked in salt water and it wouldn't go obviously wouldn't work if it was like that. So he spent 2 days taking the engines apart, cleaning them, and then reassembling them. But finally, he had them ready to turn on, and he cranked them up. And the men cheered when they heard the engines come to life. It was Savior. So they began to work their way across the Atlantic all by themselves. It took a while because they couldn't run the engines very well. And finally, they came in sight of Liverpool port. And the men standing on the deck cheered and laughed and felt so wonderful because my grandfather, in his way, needing his tea, had gone ahead and taken the initiative to find out what they could do to save themselves. And so the ship was saved, the men were saved, the cargo were saved, and all was well, just because, my grandfather had to have his tea. Now, I wanted to tell this story because yesterday was Veterans Day, and I found out a lot about the Merchant Marine as I was looking into this story. And there were more casualties of the Merchant Marine personnel than there were in all of the other military divisions in the Second World War. The Merchant Marine were not considered veterans because they were civilians, civilian volunteers. And it wasn't until 1979 that they actually were recognized as being veterans of World War II. But they saved many, many lives with the supplies that they sent, that they took over to the war. And without the war, there are a lot of experts who say, I'm sorry, without the supplies, a lot of experts say that there probably would not have been able to win the war. So I just wanted to tell this story because I think that we need to honor our veterans, whether they're civilians or not. A lot of people are responsible for the success of the Allies in World War II. Thank you.
Wow, bravo, Meg. That was incredible. What
It's an
an
incredible story, eh?
yeah, what an incredible life.
Yeah.
Um, and you tell it so that we can gain the wisdom of a lifetime. That's really, really beautiful.
It was
I,
quite a era, I think, between, the time he was born and he died in 1951. And so I think he lived in just such a dynamic time and he took advantage of it and had a wonderful life. Yeah.
and you're so right. The triumph they deserve that recognition. I've heard the expression, what, the British won the war one cup of tea at a time or something too. And of course, your story definitely reinforces that.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
was a
It's
very
quite an
important cup of tea.
yeah, that's quite an institution, that tea. My mother always had her tea too, where she was very well known for her love of Lipton tea. So yeah,
Katie
I
Mangan would
liked it.
call that builder's tea.
Yes. Yes.
Well, thank you for that story. That was absolutely beautiful.
Thank you.
All right. And if I have this right, speaking of Katie Mangan, she is next up on our roster of regular Do Tell Swap tellers, joining Alicia, who is our featured teller tonight. And Katie has been a member of the Do Tell Swap certainly a lot longer than I have. Probably around 12 years. We were trying to figure it out. It was still back in Kenneth's garage, so that can give us, some kind of indication as to how long. Um, what I enjoy about Katie's storytelling is she tells these stories that are between myth and fantasy, and they often revolve around this amazing, magical, shamanistic character named Eduardo. I don't know if we have an Eduardo story coming tonight, but if we do, we're in for a treat. If we don't, we're still in for a treat. So please welcome to our virtual stage, Katie Mangan.
Brandon, thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Today, I do not have an Eduardo story. Last year, I took a class on Zoom. It was about Celtic wisdom. And each year, they do a pilgrimage to the Scottish Highlands. And it's about one of my experiences then in the Highlands. So during the summer, I celebrated my 75th birthday. And a few weeks later, I took a 16-day pilgrimage to the Highlands of Scotland to visit sacred stones and sites. And it was on the pilgrimage that I discovered that at times I became invisible, and I did not like it. I did not have the fun that Harry Potter had with his cloak of invisibility. No, I never knew when it was going to happen or when it would end. So I decided that I would hone my listening skills and my skills of observation because, well, if I was invisible, nobody would know what I was doing, right? But as so many of us know, being invisible comes with age, old age. And I think it's doubly difficult for women. Women get labeled. We're not just old, we're old and ugly. We're a hag or a witch or a crone. Now, interestingly enough, the first site that we went to visit on the pilgrimage was to the house of a Cailleach. And the Cailleach is an ancient goddess, over 5,000 years old. And yes, some people describe her as old and ugly. Apparently, she had blue skin and one eye in her forehead. She lives in high places in the mountains, and she rules winter, its length and its harshness. And she's revered in Scotland and in Ireland. Now, we were going to have to hike in this long glen to get to the site. And so Peter was going to lead us there. And he's one of the shrine tenders. Now, the hike itself was shrouded in mystery. Nobody would tell me how many miles it was going to be, nor how long it would take us. Ooh, maybe 10 miles. Ooh, maybe 5 to 7 hours. But one thing was for sure, there was a river to cross. And that really did fill me with apprehension. We got a late start. And when we got on the road, it was already raining. The track was a dirt track. It was quite wide and relatively flat. And it wove its way from left to right. And there was water everywhere. There was water in the loch on the left, in the streams feeding the loch. There were waterfalls, small and mighty. And there were so many different shades of green. There was the bright green of the moss on the rocks and the trees near the streams. And then there was the different green of the birch leaf. And then the leaf of the rowan tree, which had these beautiful bright red berries. And then all over the hills and the mountains were these different colored grasses. And then standing out in dazzling white were the sheep in their rain-washed fleece. Well, it continued to rain, but finally we did get to the river, and we took off our boots and our socks, and we rolled up our pant legs, and we tried to figure out the best and the shallowest place to cross, and we got across okay. And we waited on the bank for everybody else to arrive. There were about 18 of us all in all. And while we were waiting, we looked to the east, and there was this rainbow, the likes of which I'd never seen before. It was kind of undulating in and out of itself, with the colors just blending in and out. Perhaps how some people experience the Great Northern Lights. So when we were finally all together, Peter explained to us a little more about the Kaliak, this very fierce goddess. And he told us that we really must be very respectful of her. We must turn off our cell phones. We must not take any photographs, and we must be in silence from our walk, from that point on, as we walk the last mile, and then during the ceremony. So as we turned to the west and started up that road, the wind and the rain intensified. We were now in the Kaliak's Glen, and it was just so hard to move forward. We had to bend our heads. And so that's how we proceeded, in silence, with our heads bowed. And we walked for about a mile. Then off to the left, we could see the Kaliak's house. It was down a grassy slope on a flat piece of land. And it's not very big, the house. It's a few feet tall, a few feet wide, a few feet deep. And it's made of rock with a thatched roof, which is covered in moss. And outside of the house are these rocks, or these river stones. And they represent the Kaliak, her husband, the Boda, and their daughter, and some other family members. And these stones are ancient, they're water-worn, and they're beautiful. So the ceremony began, we formed a semicircle. So we were facing the house and the stones. And the ceremony began by pouring milk over all the stones. And then there was a group offering, and each of us would be given something to take up and offer, and that included a sheaf of wheat that had been newly harvested, a bunch of bog myrtle. There was butter and cheese that we had made 2 days previously. There was honey, and there was mead, and of course, there was whiskey. And when the group offering had been made, we could each offer our own individual gift. Now, we come from North and South America, from Australia, from Germany, from England and Scotland, and we'd all brought something from our homes. I brought some seeds from my garden. And as I was making this offering to the Kaliak, I was startled by the beauty of the milk-washed stones and how all the gifts had been placed in her honor. And then when everyone else were making their own individual offerings, I looked down at my feet, and I noticed that my boots were in pools of water. The ground was so saturated with the rain. And I wondered to myself, how waterproof are my waterproof boots? And I was then so cold. I mean, the rain and the wind just continued. And I just willed myself to stay present. Stay in the present. Stay present, stay present. This too will pass. In 12 hours' time, hopefully you'll be dry and warm again. When everyone had made their offerings, we gathered together in a very tight circle so we could protect ourselves and each other. And we sang 1 or 2 songs. And then someone passed the bottle of whiskey around the circle. Once and then twice. It tasted so good. It was then I noticed some people were leaving and they were going back to the road. And so I raced after them because I was so desperate to move and to try and get warm. When we got to the river, we noticed it had risen, but not too much. So we again took our boots and socks off and walked across. And then I wrung out my socks and found a dry pad to put on, and then made that slow, long walk back to the vehicles. Eventually, the wind did die down, but the rain continued. At times there was sun, and then there were rainbows. Finally, the rain stopped. The sun came out. There was a beautiful early evening, golden glow, which spread all over the land. It was truly beautiful. We later learned that we had hiked 12 miles round trip. It had taken us 9 hours from 11 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock in the evening. We returned to camp by 9 o'clock, but by that time, I was so done. I wasn't hungry. I didn't go to dinner. I went back to the cabin. I made a cup of tea. I went to bed and I fell asleep. Blessings, abundance, and healing to you all.
Wow, Katie. Oh my gosh. Just the language in that story, I was really captivated by it. The sheep in their rain-washed fleece, the milk poured over the water-worn stones, and then just even the word whiskey, the way it sat in the middle. Oh, that was fantastic.
Thank you.
And far from a hag or a crone or a witch, Katie, you're always going to be so beautiful to all of us.
Thank you very much.
I mean
Appreciate
that.
that. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. That was beautiful. Wow. We are in for another treat. This next teller is Vicki Ness, and we're lucky because she moved up here from San Francisco, and she specializes in creating and telling new folk tales. And if you don't know what one of those is, I bet you're about to find out. And I like this description of new folk tale: gentle, slightly magical stories for adults. And that's a perfect description of the wonderful stories I've heard by Vicki Ness. Please welcome Vicki Ness to our virtual stage.
Thank you so much. That was a lovely introduction. I hope I didn't write that. That was pretty. Anyway, I'd like to tell you a story that suits November. It's actually a wintry November story. There was a frigid black hill, frozen silent in the November night, dark against the starry sky. It was so cold that nothing moved, seemed that nothing breathed. And it's exactly the kind of night that the spirits like to emerge. The spirits from the past, you see. They waft up and they send forth echoes of every sound that they've ever heard on that very hill. And with each sound is a flash of color. So you see, there might be a scarlet musket shot across the hill, and then the gray, grinding groaning of an old cart, or the honeycomb yellows of chickens cackling to themselves and pecking, or the lavender and neon bright like a foxfire of young lovers who once planned their elopement there. This is how the spirits of the past amuse themselves on the top of a frozen hill in the middle of the night in November. Well, rising up with no small amount of condescension are the spirits of the future. Oh, they are elegant and beautiful, and they only show what might could be a dream or a desire or a fear. What could happen on this hill? And so, for example, a young man, why, he was determined he was going to plan himself, build a big mansion, a neo Gothic affair. Oh, and so all the spirits of the future gathered and created in lights a beautiful, huge mansion with a wraparound porch and lights showing here and there and turrets. And oh, it was magnificent, glimmering here and there in the dark. It would be beautiful. But then his great aunt, who was going to leave him the money to buy such a thing, died and left all her money to the cat. So the spirits of the future dissolved back into the darkness. Somebody said that if you go up on that hill, there's nothing but murderers and thieves on top of that hill. And so the spirits of the future form shapes of light, of horrible creatures beating up on each other, yeah, until the police captain mentioned to the entire town to please stop with those rumors. There has never been a person killed on that hillside since the Revolutionary War. Oh, the spirits of the future dissolved once again. Okay, well, then there was the entrepreneur. Ooh, put this town on the map with a mall, put a mall on top of the hill. And oh, the spirits of the future shaped little boxes with Macy's written on one, and oh, all kinds of stores, and then this big sign that glowed Hilltop Mall. Would be magnificent, except that the city council said that it wasn't zoned for retail, and so all the lights fell back into the darkness. Well, this is how the spirits amused themselves at night, but this particular night, they stopped because something was lumbering up the hill. It was lurching and lumbering. It was misshapen and strange looking. And so the spirits of the past and the spirits of the future dissolved back into their netherworld to watch and see who would come up on this hill on such a dark and frigid night. The monstrous thing, it wasn't large, but it was misshapen and stumbling, threw itself on top of the hillside and threw back a parka hood, revealing a living 13-year-old girl who had come up to this very hillside so that she could voice her opinions without her family messing around. So over her flannel pajamas, she put on her bathrobe and then her daddy's overcoat and then her uncle's big muckluck jacket and a knit cap and boots and everything that she could possibly put on to keep warm. And she sat there on that frigid hillside and she looked into the impenetrable darkness and she screamed, "He's stupid! He's really stupid. I texted him, and did he text me back? No. You know why? Because he's rude. That's what he is. He's rude. He's stupid and he's rude." And she shouted out to the entire dark, impassive universe, And the more she got angry, the more she shouted, the more her heart tumbled until it just shattered open. And that's when the tears started to fall down her frozen cheeks. He doesn't he doesn't love me because I'm ugly. I'm never going to be pretty. Nobody's ever going to love me. And the tears chapped up her cheeks and her nose ran. He hates me because I'm not pretty. Nobody's ever going to love me. And her heart broke open. And her inner heart broke open. And the heart inside that broke open. And the tears flowed like rivers. And she snuffled and she shook violently in the cold. And when all of her pain and suffering had finally spent itself, she looked down the hill in the darkness and down toward town where there were 3 lights on. Well, that one would be the Coopers. You know, they have a colicky baby. Mrs. Cooper never gets any sleep. That one there, that's the radio station, and that's Weird Howard. He's in his garage inventing something. Nobody likes what he invents. He's stupid. Oh God, what's he coming up with? Nobody likes his inventions. He's weird. I'm glad I'm not weird, she said to herself and sat back. And then she looked around her in the dark and up, and she happened to notice that the absence of a moon had allowed all the stars to come out in their glittering sapphires and rubies and diamond brights. Stars beyond stars, beyond stars, beyond stars. A galaxy of lights forever and forever. And that broken heart filled with awe. And then she began to think to herself, well, they look like cell phone lights at a concert. And she could sing, you know. Her grandmother could sing, and so could she. She was going to be a star one day. And all those lights, they're going to move, oh, in the Coliseum while she's singing, and they're going to move to the beat of her heart because she's going to sing and she's going to break their hearts. And with that, she opened up her mouth into the darkness. She sang out, oh, but the cold froze up her throat and it caused her nose to run and her teeth to chatter, and she was spasming in the cold. Oh, this is horrible. What am I doing up here? I hate this. I hate everything. Everything was terrible, terrible. And then she sat, and the longer she sat, it occurred to her that after dinner, there had been a piece of pie left over. And you know, if her stupid brother hadn't eaten it, it would still be there. And if she got down to the kitchen right now, she could put it in the microwave and that would make it warm. And that would really be good right now. That would really be good. Really, really good. And so she put up her hood and rolling over all her layers of clothing, she got herself upright like a baby bear. And she started down the hill in the darkness, hoping to God that her parents weren't awake and weren't going to ask her, honey, what's wrong? Is everything all right? No, everything isn't all right. Duh. Nothing will ever be all right ever again. Picking her way down, stubbing her toe, feeling the brambles, ouch, oh, toward a butter yellow block of light, which was the kitchen window that she had left on, the light gleaming out of it. If she could just get down there, but she was tripping and feeling her way forward, ow, ooh, struggling in the dark just to get home. And as she worked her way in the dark, the spirits of the past and the spirits of the future came out of the netherworld and they stared at her in awe. And then they did what the spirits of the past and the spirits of the future always do in the presence of that holy of holies. They bowed down to that most miraculous, mysterious, magnificent thing, the living.
Do you see all the flickering hands? That's applause, Vicky.
Thank
Absolutely. Beautiful. I love the layers of time and place. And you have the past and the future. And the present always comes in the form of a jilted 13-year-old.
Nobody knows how to live life on the rough like them.
Well, it was amazing because in those scenarios you created of past and future, we got a sense for this landscape. And then it totally reorganized itself around the 13-year-old girl. And you went into her perspective, and it was just masterfully done.
Oh,
Really, really beautiful.
thank you.
Thank you for that. So I am the last storyteller. I feel very humble after all these amazing stories. And I do worry that I'm becoming somewhat of a broken record, but I tell stories over and over again, the same ones. I'm feeling like November is a month to be grateful. And there is no one I'm more grateful to than my wife. Um, our wedding was a disaster. In fact, some might argue we're not even technically married, but our honeymoon was even worse. We were not off to a good start. Um, but I'm going to talk about my honeymoon with my wife. I hope some of you haven't heard this, so it's new at least to a few of you. I grew up here in California, but I spent every summer of my life at my mother's family's house on a river in Missouri. And I loved that place. Sometimes I even tell people I'm from Missouri. Well, after I graduated from college, I moved far away from California and far away from Missouri too, all the way around the world to Indonesia, where I met who is the woman who is now my wife, and we decided to get married. My parents came out from California, and my mother pulled me aside and said, "What about your honeymoon? You can't just take her to Hawaii, because that's like this island. That'd be like going in her own backyard." She had an idea. "Why don't you take her on a road trip from our house in San Francisco to our little cabin on the river in Missouri? She can see how big and vast and beautiful the United States are." Seemed like a great idea. I don't know why, but it took a turn for the worse right away because my wife became very ill while we were driving, and I didn't know what her illness was. It turned out later she became infected with the mumps immediately. Her country, they didn't immunize for that. And apparently we have mumps virus everywhere. So it was a pretty strong fever. And by the time I rolled down the gravel road to our cabin on this river in Missouri, she was practically unconscious. Don't worry, I would take her to a doctor. But I still had honeymoon on my mind, and I wanted to do this right. And so I opened up the passenger door. I knelt down and scooped her up with the intention of carrying her across the threshold. And I made my way to the door of the cabin. And when I opened the door, my heart sank. Out gushed water from inside the house. Thousands of gallons of river water flooded out from inside, and thousands of gallons were still trapped in the house. So I put my wife back in the passenger seat of the car. I rolled up my pants and started wading into this first floor room with the intention of attempting to drain this house. As I got in about 15 feet, I stopped. Through the gloom of that first floor room, I caught the luminous glow of white foam on the crest of a wake that was being made by something that was swimming just beneath the surface. Something big was in the back of the room, swimming in slow circles. Instinctively, I backed out and I began to think. We have some pretty big snakes. Crocodile or alligators don't usually make it up that far, but that certainly came to mind. I did the only thing I could think of, which was to drive to the only place of business for miles in this remote area. It was a bar, and it was run by a former Marine whose name was Booby. Oh, Booby was glad to see me. He'd known me all my life. He had even received a invitation to my wedding, and he was very sorry he couldn't make it. It was just too far. I held up my hand. Booby, I said, and he said, what? I said, there's water in my house. And his eyes widened. Oh, we had a big rain about 6 weeks ago. Oh, buddy, I should have gone down and checked your place. I'm real sorry. Booby, I said. And he said, what? There's something in the water in my house. And he looked at me and he asked, what do you suppose it is? And I'll be danged if right behind him wasn't this photograph. In the photograph was Booby, and hanging from his arms was an enormous prehistoric paddlefish, the kind that still swim the cold green waters of the Ozark Mountains. Well, I don't think I even said the word paddlefish when he looked back there and back at me, and his hand reached for the till of his register, and he pulled out his big black commando knife. And then he said in a way that only a Marine can say something, well, I suppose I better go take a look. This next scene is like right out of a gosh darn horror movie. There we were, the three of us, me, Booby, and my bride wedged between us in his white pickup truck, driving down to that house. The sun was setting. We arrived at that dark house, that house full of water with the thing in the water. We left my wife in the truck to rest. And armed with a flashlight and a very long net, we made our way in through the top of the house. And we followed the stairs down to where they disappeared in that muddy water. And sure enough, there was that thing still churning up the mud off the bottom of the floor, swimming in slow, deliberate circles. We rolled up our pants. Booby went that way. I went the other. Stretched between us was this long net. And at first, it looked like our plan was going to work. That thing turned and started swimming right into the middle of our net. I've only screamed twice in my life. The first time was just a few years earlier. I was sleeping in a lean-to hut in the jungles of Sumatra, and I awakened in the middle of the night to find a rat the size of a cat chewing on my lower lip. It's like you hear someone else screaming when you really scream. It comes from your diaphragm. Well, this was the second time. As I put my bare foot down into that mud and ooze lining the linoleum floor beneath the river water, something slithered right over the top of my foot, which meant whatever this thing was, it was a heck of a lot bigger than either one of us imagined. Why, it had to be 25, 30 feet long. And I screamed, and the force of my scream caused me to fall over, and I went down in the water with the thing. I rolled over onto my knees and I began raking that muddy water from my eyes so I'd be prepared to deal with whatever was happening. And three things were happening. The first was the thing. It began to rise up out of the water. It was swollen and bloated and slick and striped like a snake, and this mysterious howling filled the room. The second thing was my bride. She must have awakened down in the truck and wondered what was keeping us. And she came tottering down those stairs, and I think the magnitude of the situation was a bit much in her fevered state. And she just kind of crumpled and fell in the water. So I surged over through that waist-deep muddy water to assist her. The third thing was Booby. First, I didn't even know where he was. Then I caught him in the beam of my flashlight. Why, he was way up on top of my grandmother's pie safe in this crouched position that only a Marine can do. And in his hand was that big black commando knife. Then he was in the air over the thing, and he landed on it, and he pushed that knife in and gave it a twist. Bam! Explosion! And a gritty mist filled the room. Now, if you go to Booby's bar, there are two pictures. In the first, there's Booby holding that paddlefish I told you about, and he claims he caught it with his bare hands and killed it. Well, in the second, there's me and Booby, and wedged between us, my half-conscious bride, and draped from our arms is what Booby will tell you is the second paddlefish he caught with his hands and killed with his commando knife. Oh, but the beard on every farmer in that bar will begin to bounce up and down. Every farmer in that bar knows that's no paddlefish. Why, hanging from our arms, that's nothing but an ordinary household vacuum cleaner. We had left it plugged in, and when the water level rose, some piece of furniture must have floated by and punched the button on, and it had been sucking water in and spitting it out, going in circles for God knows how long. The thing that had slithered over my foot must have been the cord. I don't know how we were not electrocuted. Well, this was a horrible honeymoon. And I figured I owed my wife a real one. So when we made it back to California, I started saving up. And finally, I could afford to pay for the plane tickets to take her to where she had actually wanted to go all of her life. And that would be Hawaii. Well, thank you all for coming. I'm going to call up our tellers. One by one. As you see their faces, you can remember the stories that they've given you tonight. And who am I missing? I think that's it. Right? Yeah. Well, here we are. It's November 2024. And felt our, I don't know, my mood was a little bit low today. But you know, something is really wonderful when you spend time with a group of people like this and you feel kind of healed and
Yeah.
your mood is just so much better. And I
Yeah.
want to thank you all for that.
Oh,
And
thank you.
I hope
Thank
other
everyone.
people feel the same way
Yeah, it was
as
great.
I think they do. And
I'd
I
like
look
to
forward for this. And I want to thank especially Alicia. Um, would you like to say a few words at the close? You're our featured teller this year, and we're so honored to have you.
Oh gosh, thank you. Well, don't cry now. Don't cry. Thank you so very much. This was Do Tell was my very first story swap, and it's very precious to me, and I love you all, and I'm so grateful that you asked me to come today because I really haven't told that story or done much of this kind of telling. It's pretty much classroom style, which is fine, and I love it, and it brings the income. But this is what a wonderful opportunity. It really stretched me. I spent all day going, get the hat, da-da-da. This is it, So I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm telling at a variety of libraries throughout the Bay Area. I'm in Hercules on Thursday, Berkeley on Saturday, someplace else, and I'm so grateful that this is the second season in a row telling these companion plant stories for the San Diego library system.
Oh,
Yeah. I'm commuting. I'm
wow.
like, yay, thank you. And they asked me to come again this year and early next year. And we've got a couple of schools. So word's getting out about this particular program that is really not about the Coast Miwok anymore. It's more about the companion planting the earth and all sorts of wonderful things. So thanks very much for letting me be here. And I do want to take you up on those. I think it's on Tuesdays. The office is open.
Yes.
Yeah, I've branched out. I don't just tell about corned bean and squash. I'm looking at other companion plants like tomato with basil and cilantro, who protect the tomato from the hornworm. And maybe sometime I could practice that with you. Just it's such a great group. I mean, you're all so talented, and the imagination in the descriptions and everything is just like you crack me up. Thank you so much. And so very beautiful too, Katie. That was just very dear what you shared. So thank you for that. Thank you. Yeah.
And Alicia, we hope you'll be a part of our community as often as you can. We would
Yeah.
love to have you.
Yeah, thank you. I want to get back on board. Yeah, I don't want to miss out on this. This is good stuff. Thank you.
So I want to thank Meg Brown for
Amen.
telling tonight, but also organizing this entire event. And I just want to say a special wish for Vina. We all hope you are healing and you have all of our love.
Oh,
And we're thinking of you. And I think it's only fitting that we dedicate this celebration to you and your family.
yeah.
And so until we meet again next month, I'm Brandon Spars, and this has been Celebration 2024. And I want to thank you all for coming. So good night,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Good night,
Good
Thank you,
night,
everybody.
everyone.
everybody. This has been superb.
Yes. Yay.
Yay. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.